U.S. auto industry is under attack, but this time, the threat isn't coming from China or Europe, it's coming from Canada. That's right, our biggest trade partner just made a move that could cripple American car production, skyrocket prices, and send thousands of jobs overseas. But this isn't just about tariffs. Tesla, Ford, and General Motors are all caught in the crossfire, and the entire auto industry is hanging in the balance. What started as a tariff dispute has now turned into a full-scale economic standoff. Billions of dollars in auto trade are at risk. Tesla and the entire EV industry could face a major crisis. Factory closures and massive layoffs may be coming. In today's video, we're breaking down how Canada is strategically targeting the US auto sector, the devastating impact on Tesla and the electric vehicle industry, why this trade war could force factory shutdowns and job losses, and the political battle behind the economic chaos, Trump, tariffs, and the 2024 election. With automakers scrambling, prices soaring, and political tensions at a breaking point, the future of North America's auto industry has never been more uncertain. What do you think? Will this trade war backfire on the US, or is Canada making a bold stand? What's happening? Trade disputes between the United States and Canada are nothing new, but this time, something is different. What started as a straightforward tariff decision by the United States has escalated into a full-scale economic standoff, with Canada launching a strategic counterstrike that could shift the balance of power in North American trade. Instead of reacting impulsively, Canada has taken a precise and calculated approach, choosing to hit the United States where it hurts the most. In response to the United States' 25% tariff on key Canadian exports, Canada has imposed its own set of retaliatory tariffs. But rather than applying broad, indiscriminate tariffs, Canada has targeted politically and economically sensitive industries. Industries that impact key voter bases and major corporations. Among the hardest hit sectors, American agriculture, bourbon exports from Kentucky, and most importantly, the auto industry. One of the most devastating blows came from Canada's decision to place heavy tariffs on electric vehicles and critical automotive parts. With billions of dollars worth of automotive trade flowing between the two countries each year, this move has sent shockwaves through the industry. It has not only affected automakers, but also disrupted the complex web of suppliers, dealers, and workers who depend on a smooth, tariff-free trade system. This is not just about economics, it is a strategic message. Canada is proving that it will not be pushed around, and that it has the power to make trade restrictions hurt the United States just as much, if not more. What started as a trade war may now be turning into a battle of political leverage. The question is, how much damage will this do to the American economy before Washington takes action? And Canada is not stopping there. The biggest blow is coming for one of America's most influential automakers, Tesla. Tesla and the EV industry in crisis. Tesla has long been considered the face of American innovation, but now the electric vehicle giant is finding itself caught in the crossfire of this trade war, and the consequences could be devastating. At the core of Tesla's production success is its reliance on key raw materials from Canada. The company sources nickel, lithium, and aluminum, all critical components in electric vehicle batteries, from Canadian suppliers. But with Canada now imposing strict tariffs and restrictions on these exports, Tesla's supply chain is at risk of grinding to a halt. The immediate consequences are severe. With supply costs skyrocketing, Tesla will be forced to either raise prices on its vehicles or cut production, both of which spell trouble for the company's growth and profitability. Investors have already taken notice. Tesla's stock has seen sharp fluctuations as fears of a supply crisis continue to mount. But this is not just about Tesla. The entire electric vehicle market in the United States is now feeling the impact. Other automakers, including Ford, General Motors, and Rivian, also depend on Canadian resources to manufacture their EV models. The inflation of raw material prices means that the cost of producing an electric vehicle will surge, making it harder for consumers to afford them. The irony? The Biden administration has been pushing aggressively for a transition to electric vehicles as part of its climate goals. Yet this trade war could derail the entire EV industry before it even reaches mass adoption. The more expensive EVs become, the less likely the average consumer is to make the switch, setting the industry back years. And as if the EV crisis was not enough, the situation is about to get worse for automakers across the board. The entire North American auto supply chain is unraveling. The auto industry's breaking point. The North American auto industry is one of the most interconnected supply chains in the world. A single car can have parts that cross the US-Canada border multiple times before it is fully assembled. But with these new tariffs, that seamless supply chain is beginning to crack, and automakers are scrambling to respond. For decades, manufacturers have relied on a predictable, tariff-free flow of materials between the United States and Canada. Aluminum, steel, computer chips, batteries, and even glass, all essential components of modern vehicles, are shipped between factories in both countries dozens of times before a car rolls off the production line. Now, with sudden tariffs adding billions in extra costs, automakers are being forced to make impossible decisions. Some companies are already cutting production. Ford has announced potential layoffs at plants that rely heavily on Canadian parts. General Motors has slowed down output at some facilities due to supply chain bottlenecks. The biggest fear: factory closures and job losses. And then there is the issue of pricing. Every added cost in the supply chain eventually gets passed on to consumers. If this trade war continues, American consumers could see the biggest price hikes in auto history. Buying a new car, already expensive due to chip shortages and inflation, could soon become out of reach for millions of Americans. The biggest irony? These tariffs were initially designed to protect American manufacturing jobs, but instead of boosting domestic production, they are forcing factories to shut down, leading to layoffs and economic uncertainty. This trade war is doing the exact opposite of what it was meant to achieve. And as economic conditions worsen, the political pressure is reaching a boiling point. The battle over trade is now becoming a major political issue that could shape the upcoming elections. The political fallout. This trade war is no longer just about economics. It has become a political weapon, one that is dividing leaders, influencing elections, and shaping the future of North American relations. President Donald Trump has been a vocal supporter of protectionist trade policies, arguing that tariffs will force companies to bring manufacturing back to the United States. But his strategy has had unintended consequences, especially in key swing states where factories are now laying off workers instead of hiring them. With the 2024 election approaching, Trump's trade policies are under scrutiny, and his supporters in manufacturing-heavy states are starting to question whether these tariffs are truly helping American workers. Meanwhile, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has framed this trade war as a fight for Canada's sovereignty. He has positioned Canada's retaliatory measures as a necessary defense against economic bullying, rallying national support for the tariffs. Many Canadians now see this as a moment of national pride, a chance to stand up to the United States and prove that Canada will not be taken advantage of. The question is, how long can this political standoff last before it spirals into a full-scale economic crisis? With factory jobs on the line, auto prices rising, and global markets reacting to the chaos, both leaders are under pressure to find a way out of this escalating trade war. But with elections looming on both sides of the border, neither wants to be seen as backing down. And if this trade war continues, the economic consequences could spread far beyond the auto industry, hitting other sectors that no one expected. Energy as Canada's ultimate leverage. If you think the trade war between the United States and Canada is bad now, imagine what would happen if Canada decided to weaponize its energy exports. The United States relies heavily on Canadian oil, natural gas, and electricity to power its economy. While Canada has not yet played this card, the possibility alone is enough to send shivers through Washington. Right now, Canada is the largest foreign supplier of crude oil to the United States, accounting for nearly 50% of all US oil imports. That means that if Canada were to cut exports or raise prices, the consequences would be immediate and catastrophic. Gasoline prices would skyrocket overnight, leading to an inflation surge that could cripple American consumers and businesses alike. Beyond oil, Canada is also a major supplier of electricity to the northern United States. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Detroit rely on Canadian hydroelectric power to keep their grids running smoothly. If Canada were to limit electricity exports, rolling blackouts and power shortages could become a reality, forcing the US to scramble for alternative sources. The mere threat of such a move gives Canada enormous leverage in trade negotiations. While Canadian officials have not yet taken drastic action, the message is clear. If the United States continues to push unfair trade policies, Canada has the power to strike back in ways that could cripple entire industries and disrupt millions of lives. But energy is just one piece of the puzzle. The global economic repercussions of this trade war are already starting to take shape. Global reverberations. What started as a bilateral dispute is now creating a ripple effect across the global economy. Other countries are watching this trade war unfold, and many of them are adjusting their own trade policies in response. One of the biggest winners in this situation? China. As tensions between the United States and Canada escalate, China is stepping in to strengthen trade ties with Canada, offering lucrative deals on energy, raw materials, and auto parts. If China successfully secures long-term agreements with Canadian suppliers, the United States could permanently lose access to crucial resources, a move that would weaken American industries for years to come. At the same time, European nations are looking to shift their trade alliances. With North American economic uncertainty on the rise, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom are rethinking their supply chains and looking for more stable trade partners. If this trend continues, American companies could lose billions in global trade opportunities, all because of a conflict that could have been avoided. Then there is the issue of developing nations. Countries in South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia are seeing new opportunities to step in and fill the gaps left by disrupted North American trade. This means that American businesses may no longer be the first choice for international markets, further weakening U.S. economic dominance. The longer this trade war continues, the more the United States risks losing its influence on the global stage. Trade is not just about money, it is about trust, relationships, and long-term partnerships. Right now, many countries are questioning whether the United States is still a reliable trade partner, and while global markets are feeling the impact, the people who will suffer the most are ordinary consumers. The financial toll is already hitting households across America. Rising costs and shrinking paychecks. For politicians in Washington, trade wars are a matter of policy and strategy, but for everyday Americans, they are a matter of survival. Inflation has already been a major concern for millions of families, and now this trade war is making everything worse. The cost of everyday goods, from groceries to gas to household essentials, is climbing higher as businesses struggle to absorb the added costs of tariffs. One of the biggest price hikes, automobiles. As the cost of car production rises due to supply chain disruptions, consumers are being hit with record-breaking sticker prices. Buying a new car is already out of reach for many Americans, and now even the used car market is becoming unaffordable as demand outpaces supply. But the problem does not stop there. Tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum mean that prices for appliances, construction materials, and electronics are soaring. That means that if you are planning to buy a new refrigerator, renovate your home, or upgrade your smartphone, you can expect to pay significantly more in the coming months. And then there is the job market. The very tariffs that were meant to protect American jobs are now forcing businesses to lay off workers. Companies that rely on Canadian materials are cutting costs wherever possible, leading to factory closures, pay cuts, and widespread job uncertainty. The result? Thousands of American workers are now facing unemployment, and for those who still have jobs, their paychecks are not stretching as far as they used to. This is not just an economic inconvenience, it is a full-blown financial crisis for millions of families. If this trade war does not de-escalate soon, American consumers could be looking at one of the worst cost of living crises in modern history. This trade war is not just about Canada and the United States, it is part of a much larger global shift. But while the decline of manufacturing is concerning, there is another major shift happening. This trade war is not just a short-term political dispute, it is part of a larger global shift. The more the United States isolates itself with tariffs and trade restrictions, the more opportunities it creates for other nations to rise in power. But the auto industry is just one piece of the puzzle. What happens next? Will the U.S. continue down this path of economic isolation, or will leaders find a way to restore balance and rebuild trust with its trade partners? The next few months could determine the long-term future of America's economic standing, and the consequences will be felt for decades to come. Immigration crackdowns and the farming crisis. While the trade war between the United States and Canada has dominated headlines, another crisis is brewing, one that could devastate the American agricultural industry. The strict immigration policies proposed by President Donald Trump could cripple farms across the country, making it nearly impossible to sustain food production at the levels required to feed the nation. For decades, American farms have relied on migrant labor to plant, cultivate, and harvest crops. These workers, many from Mexico and Central America, take on the back-breaking jobs that few Americans are willing to do. Without them, entire farming operations would collapse, and food prices would skyrocket. Now, with Trump's proposed mass deportations and severe immigration restrictions, farmers are sounding the alarm. If these policies go into effect, millions of agricultural jobs could go unfilled, leaving crops to rot in the fields and driving food costs to historic highs. The impact would extend far beyond farming communities. Supermarkets, restaurants, and food distributors would all struggle with shortages, ultimately affecting consumers across the country. This is not just speculation. In states like Georgia and Alabama, previous attempts that aggressive immigration crackdowns led to immediate labor shortages, forcing farmers to leave their crops unharvested and suffer millions of dollars in losses. The reality is clear: without a stable workforce, American farms cannot function. But the farming industry is not the only sector at risk. The labor shortages caused by restrictive immigration policies will also disrupt manufacturing, construction, and the service industry, creating a ripple effect across the entire economy. The manufacturing crisis and workforce shortages. For decades, American manufacturing was the backbone of the economy, providing millions of stable, well-paying jobs. From the roaring factories of Detroit to the steel mills of Pennsylvania, the industry was once a symbol of national strength, but over the past 40 years, manufacturing jobs have steadily disappeared, offshored to countries with cheaper labor or replaced by automation. Today, that crisis is accelerating, and the U.S. is at a breaking point. The ongoing trade war with Canada has only made things worse. Tariffs on steel, aluminum, and auto parts have driven up production costs, forcing companies to slow down operations, lay off workers, and in some cases shut down entirely. Instead of protecting American jobs, these tariffs are pushing manufacturers to look for cheaper suppliers overseas, undermining the very industries they were meant to support. But tariffs are just one part of the problem. A severe labor shortage is compounding the crisis. Manufacturing and construction firms across the country are struggling to find skilled workers, especially as older generations retire and fewer young Americans enter the trades. Immigrant workers, who have long filled crucial roles in these industries, are also in short supply due to stricter immigration policies. Without enough hands to keep production running, factory output is declining, construction projects are stalling, and businesses are being forced to either pay skyrocketing wages or relocate jobs elsewhere. The consequences of this crisis extend far beyond factories and construction sites. When manufacturing declines, entire supply chains suffer. Small businesses that depend on factory orders see their revenue dry up. Transportation companies lose work, and communities built around industrial jobs experience economic collapse. Cities like Flint, Michigan, and Youngstown, Ohio, are stark reminders of what happens when an industry vanishes. Abandoned factories, rising unemployment, and a struggling middle class. If the U.S. does not take urgent action by stabilizing trade relations, investing in workforce training, and reforming immigration policies, this crisis will only deepen. The manufacturing and construction sectors are essential to economic stability, and without them, America risks falling even further behind in global competition. But the problems do not end there. The economic struggles caused by labor shortages are only made worse by ongoing inflation and rising interest rates, which are placing even more pressure on businesses and consumers alike. Inflation, interest rates, and economic instability. Even without trade wars and labor shortages, the American economy is already struggling with inflation and rising interest rates. Over the past 3 years, inflation has driven up the cost of everything from groceries to housing to transportation, making it harder for families to maintain their standard of living. Wages, while increasing in some sectors, have not kept pace with the rising costs, leaving many Americans with less purchasing power than before. And now, with high interest rates making borrowing more expensive, businesses and consumers are feeling the squeeze like never before. For businesses, higher interest rates mean higher costs for loans, making it more difficult to expand operations, invest in new equipment, or hire more workers. This creates a slowdown in economic growth, which in turn leads to job losses and lower wages. Small businesses, which often rely on loans to cover operating costs, are being hit especially hard. Many are being forced to cut staff, delay expansion plans, or even shut down completely. The result, a shrinking job market and declining confidence in the economy. For consumers, the impact is even more direct. Mortgages, car loans, and credit card debt have all become more expensive, leaving many families struggling to keep up with rising costs. The American dream of home ownership is slipping further out of reach for younger generations, as high interest rates make it nearly impossible to afford a home. Rental prices are also surging, leaving millions of people with fewer options for affordable housing. Meanwhile, higher credit card interest rates are making it harder for households to manage debt, pushing many deeper into financial insecurity. And then there is the problem of corporate pricing power. Even as inflation slows, major corporations continue to raise prices, squeezing every last dollar from consumers. Shrinkflation, where companies reduce product sizes while keeping prices the same, has become common practice, further eroding consumer purchasing power. The result? A weaker middle class, declining consumer spending, and an economy that is becoming more unstable by the day. If spending continues to drop, businesses will struggle even more, leading to further economic contraction. So what does this all mean? It means that America is facing not just one economic crisis, but multiple crises at once. Trade wars, labor shortages, inflation, and rising costs are all colliding, creating a perfect storm that could define the future of the US economy for years to come. Economic uncertainty is fueling anxiety among both businesses and consumers, and if these issues are not addressed soon, the consequences could be long-lasting. But if there is one thing history has shown, it is that economic power can shift. The United States must decide now whether to adapt and rebuild, or continue down a path of isolation and decline. The choices made today will determine the economic landscape of tomorrow. Will leaders take action to restore economic stability, or will the country sink deeper into financial hardship? The future of the US economy. Can America stay on top? For nearly a century, the United States has been the world's dominant economic power, shaping global trade policies and setting the rules for international markets. But now, that dominance is being challenged. Trade wars, labor shortages, inflation, and rising global competition are eroding America's economic foundation, and the choices made today will determine whether the country maintains its leadership or falls behind. The US economy is at a crossroads. On one hand, decades of protectionist policies and outsourcing have weakened domestic manufacturing and disrupted industries that once thrived. On the other, emerging powers like China, India, and Brazil are rapidly expanding their influence, forming new trade alliances and taking advantage of America's economic uncertainty. If the US does not act soon, it risks losing its position as the center of global commerce. One of the biggest threats to US economic stability is its increasingly strained trade relationships. The current trade war with Canada has disrupted supply chains, raised production costs, and pushed key industries, especially the auto and energy sectors, into turmoil. If Washington continues to impose tariffs and trade restrictions, allies may seek alternatives, making America less relevant in the global market. China, for example, is already stepping in to form stronger trade ties with Canada, threatening America's access to crucial raw materials like nickel and aluminum. Another major issue is the labor shortage, with stricter immigration policies limiting the workforce in agriculture, construction, and manufacturing. Businesses are struggling to fill essential positions. The irony is clear: the very policies designed to bring jobs back to America are making it harder for industries to function. Without a reliable labor force, production slows, prices rise, and the economy weakens. Meanwhile, inflation and rising interest rates continue to squeeze consumers and businesses alike. The cost of living has soared, making it harder for Americans to afford housing, transportation, and everyday necessities. If interest rates remain high, borrowing will become even more expensive, further slowing economic growth. But if they drop too soon, inflation could spiral out of control again, putting the Federal Reserve in a delicate balancing act. So what happens next? The path forward depends on the choices made in the coming months. Scaling back aggressive trade restrictions could stabilize supply chains and prevent further price hikes. Smart immigration policies could provide businesses with the workers they need to stay competitive, and careful economic management could ensure that inflation is controlled without triggering a major recession. The future of the US economy is uncertain, but one thing is clear: America must adapt or risk losing its influence. If leaders take the right steps, the country can rebuild its industrial strength, regain global trust, and remain a dominant economic force. But if the current trajectory continues, the US may find itself sidelined as other nations rise to power. The next few years will determine everything. Will America make the necessary changes to secure its economic future? Or is this the beginning of a long-term decline? The world is watching, and the stakes could not be higher. Do you believe America can recover from this trade war and economic crisis? Or do you think the country is heading toward long-term decline? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear your perspective.